When you become unattainable, this is what really happens. The power of unreachable. Have you ever felt like you don't truly belong, even in a room full of people? It's not because you're shy or sad, but because something deep inside you has shifted. For years, you've been taught to always be available to respond instantly, to smile even when you don't feel like it, and to do everything in your power to please others. But somewhere along the way, you lost something precious: yourself. In this video, we dive deep into why constantly pleasing others isn't kindness, but a way of losing your true essence. We'll explore how being less available can help you reclaim your inner peace, set emotional boundaries, and live more authentically. It's time to stop reacting to everyone else's expectations and start living for yourself. This is the journey back to your true self. No one ever taught you that sometimes being less available is necessary to be respected, that you don't have to always be ready, always smiling, always responding. Your presence has value, and that value doesn't come from being constantly present, but from knowing when to hold something back for yourself. Healing begins with this realization. You weren't born to please everyone. You were born to live authentically, and only when you stop grasping at everything outside yourself can you finally touch the deepest part within. Each time you react instantly, you give others power over your emotions. They press a button, and you flip like a switch. You think you're defending yourself, but in fact, you're exposing your most vulnerable points, and those skilled in manipulation will use them. Out there, some people don't need to shout to win. They just need to know how you'll react, and that's enough. But here's the paradox. Their power only exists as long as you keep reacting. When you pause, when you learn not to respond to every attack, every condescending look, every toxic word, you don't grow weaker, you grow stronger. You weren't born to be a puppet to emotional triggers. You were born to choose when to respond and when to remain silent. Real freedom isn't in always saying what you want, but in not being forced to say what you don't need to. Healing is when you no longer follow your unconscious impulses. When you can stop, take a deep breath, and choose calm instead, because sometimes the most powerful answer is no reaction at all. Being hard to read is not avoidance. It's the first step toward inner freedom. We often mistake not responding for coldness, and being hard to read for emotional detachment, but perhaps no one ever told you, when you stop reacting, stop trying to please everyone, it's not distance, it's the first sign that someone is reclaiming their power. Being hard to read doesn't mean you're building walls. It means you're learning to set boundaries. It means you no longer share every thought, no longer explain every decision, no longer dive into relationships just to avoid being alone. That guardedness doesn't make you less loving. It makes your presence more valuable. When you're no longer an open book for everyone to flip through, you start to feel lighter. Not everyone deserves access to the hidden corners of your soul. Not everyone has the sensitivity to hold what you're still learning to heal. Keeping your deepest emotions private isn't weakness, it's maturity. And something strange happens. When you become less accessible, you become more magnetic. People are drawn to what they can't easily reach. The inner world, by its nature, fascinates and commands more respect than anything constantly exposed. Becoming hard to read is your way of saying, I am no longer easily wounded. You're not rejecting connection, but you're being selective. You're not building walls, but growing a forest, where only those who are deep and patient enough will reach you. And that's the first step toward true freedom. Those who can stay silent carry a magnetic power beyond words. Some people don't need to say much or appear too often, but whenever they walk into a room, the atmosphere shifts. They don't need to prove anything. They don't rush to show themselves. They simply are present, grounded, and enigmatic. Their power doesn't come from volume, but from depth, not from their words, but from silence chosen at the right moment. True magnetism doesn't lie in what you constantly reveal, but in what you choose to keep for yourself. When you speak less, people start listening more. When you stop rushing to explain, they begin thinking more about you. Your silence becomes not a lack, but a space that commands respect. We've grown too used to living as if every thought and emotion must be shared instantly to validate our existence. But in that noise, what people remember about you is not what you said, but what you didn't. Stillness, patience, and especially the ability to hold back what doesn't need to be said, these form a quiet, captivating kind of elegance. When you stop being a public journal, you start becoming a mystery, and humans are always drawn to what they don't fully understand, not because you're hiding anything, but because you're choosing the right people to open up to, and that makes you different. Keeping a space of silence for yourself is not about distance. It's about preserving your wholeness. It's a gift you give to yourself, and it's what makes you irreplaceable. Letting go is not failure. It's a choice to return to yourself. We're often taught that letting go is something negative, that if you leave a relationship, a job, or an outdated dream, it means you're weak, that you gave up, that you didn't try hard enough. But no one ever told you that some things, if you don't let them go, you'll end up losing yourself. There are relationships that drain you, but you stay because you fear loneliness, jobs that make you forget who you are, but you remain because you fear failure. And there are versions of yourself you've upheld for years because you're afraid to admit you've changed. But letting go isn't rejection. Letting go is honesty. The honesty to look at the truth, that something once fit you, but no longer does. That you can be grateful for a journey and still choose to walk a new one. That you can love and still leave, if that love is making you shrink. Letting go doesn't make you less. It brings you closer to your true self. It's the courage to step beyond your comfort zone, to choose lightness over struggling to hold what's already gone. And sometimes the bravest thing is not to continue, but to stop. You don't need to stay just to prove you tried. You don't need to carry what no longer belongs to you. Life doesn't reward endurance. It heals honesty. And the most honest thing you can do is to let go so your hands are free to embrace yourself. But here's what you need to know. People who are already willing to misunderstand you aren't actually waiting for the truth. They're not looking for more facts. They're looking for validation of the perspective they've already chosen to believe. To them, every explanation is just more ammunition to continue judging or dismissing you. Over-explaining is how you drain yourself for people who never truly listened. And every time you do it, you trade your inner peace for external validation, something that is ever-changing, conditional, and never enough. You don't need to be understood to be valuable. You don't need to be right in someone else's eyes to feel at ease with yourself. True clarity doesn't come from words, but from the energy you carry. The ones who are deep enough will sense it, and those who don't no longer matter. You have the right to be silent. You have the right to walk away without offering an explanation. You have the right to choose peace over the battle for approval, because the moment you stop trying to make others understand is the moment you begin to understand yourself more deeply. And that is worth more than any justification in the world. You may not always be present, but you're never forgotten. We grow up believing that to keep a place in someone's heart, we must always be available, always ready, always proving our existence. So we force ourselves to show up in every conversation, to reply to every message, to maintain every connection, even when it exhausts us and pulls us away from ourselves. But there are people who don't need to show up often or loudly, yet they're never forgotten because they carry a different kind of presence, one that comes from depth, not frequency. They don't try to be remembered, but anyone who's ever touched their soul never forgets them. You don't need to always be there to be loved, because real connection isn't nourished by constant availability. It's nourished by the fullness of your presence when you are there. When you show up with calm, without rushing, without proving, without performing, you create a space where others feel seen, touched by something real. Showing up at the right moment. That is the art, not getting swept into meaningless interactions, not replying just to avoid disconnection, not rushing in for validation, but choosing the right moments to appear fully and authentically. When you learn to step away at times to care for your inner world, to renew your energy, to listen to yourself, you're not disappearing. You're growing the kind of presence that, when you return, makes people realize this is someone irreplaceable. The one who stays calm is the one truly in control of their inner world. In tense, insulting, or misunderstood situations, the human instinct is to react, to argue back, to defend the ego, to clarify the truth. But these instant reactions are often the clearest signs of lost self-control. because you're acting out of emotional trigger, not conscious choice. The truly strong are not those who say the sharpest words or silence others in debate. The truly strong are those who don't need to react to prove anything. They can stand in the face of provocation without wavering. They can walk past insults without losing their inner clarity. When you stay calm in the midst of chaos, you're not just protecting yourself, you're taking charge of the situation, because others can do everything to pull you into their emotional vortex, but only you decide whether to step in. That's where freedom begins. Staying calm doesn't mean suppressing your emotions. It means understanding that not every emotion needs expression. Not every attack needs an answer. Some things should pass like the wind. Some conversations are best left in silence. When you stop acting on impulse, you begin to live from a deeper place. When you're no longer controlled by what's outside, you start truly connecting with what's inside. And from that space, you'll realize calmness is not weakness. It's the highest form of strength. The one who remains centered in the storm is the one who owns their destiny. The emotional boundaries you set reflect the depth of your self-respect. Some people don't need to shout to establish boundaries. They don't need to declare limits or threaten anyone, but when you step too close to their inner world, you clearly sense where the line is. They don't say much, but they make others instinctively aware of the need for respect. Because boundaries aren't words, they're energy. Have you ever let someone violate your emotional space because you were afraid they'd feel hurt? Or because you feared being seen as selfish? Have you listened to negativity day after day without saying enough? Have you forgiven not because you wanted to, but because you were scared of being disliked? That's not compassion. That's the absence of boundaries. And a lack of boundaries always leads to pain. When you don't define your limits, the world assumes you have none. People will keep asking, keep pushing. And one day, you won't recognize where you are and where the version of you that exists only to please others begins. Self-respect isn't arrogance. It's the ability to say no when necessary, to walk away when you're being disrespected, to know who deserves your openness and who should stay outside the gate. When you begin setting boundaries, you're telling the world, my emotions matter too, and deserve the same respect as anyone else's. Boundaries are the highest form of self-love. They don't make you lonely, they make your relationships healthier. And only when you honor your own limits will others learn to honor you. It doesn't need to be shouted, but it's always felt. No one can take away your peace unless you allow it. There are people who once made you furious with just a glance, words so small and passing, but they haunted you for days, cold silences that kept you awake at night. But here's the truth. Those things only hurt you if you let them enter your inner space. We've become used to letting the world dictate our emotional state, one unanswered message, and we feel invisible, one rejection, and we question our worth, one misunderstanding, and we feel the urge to prove ourselves. But real peace doesn't come from everyone treating you kindly. It comes from knowing who has the right to touch your emotions and who doesn't. When you begin to filter what you allow to matter, when you stop letting outside reactions control your internal world, you don't just become stronger, you begin to heal. You stop chasing approval. You stop defending your reputation. You stop fearing abandonment. Instead, you find a new state, wholeness, steadiness, and emotional stability. No one can touch your deepest self unless you allow it. No one can diminish your worth unless you start doubting it yourself. And no one can take your peace if you guard it like a fire worth protecting each day. Peace is not a luxury. It is a choice made again and again in every response. And when you truly choose it, the world around you will have to adjust or step back. The courage to let go of what no longer serves you. Even if you once longed for it, there are things that once made your heart tremble, kept you up at night with excitement, dreams you chased for years. But at some point, you look back and realize they no longer fit, they no longer help you grow, they no longer nourish your spirit. And that's when you face one of the hardest decisions, to let go of something you once deeply wanted. Letting go isn't denying the past, it's acknowledging that you've changed, that your path no longer aligns with what once mattered. Maybe it's a relationship you gave too much to a job that once made you proud, a social circle that once felt safe, and now they feel too small, not because they're wrong, but because you've outgrown them. Many people hold on out of fear of being judged, of being labeled a quitter, but the truth is, holding on to what no longer serves you only leads you further away from your true path. You don't need to stay just to prove loyalty. You only need the courage to walk away when that's the truest form of loyalty to yourself. Saying no to what no longer fits is a profound act of self-love because you understand not everything that once brought you joy will continue to bring you peace. And real happiness doesn't lie in clinging to the familiar, but in creating space for something new to enter. When you're brave enough to say no to what once meant everything, you're really saying yes to yourself. And sometimes maturity begins with that gentle but powerful refusal. When you no longer need to speak, silence becomes your deepest power. There were conversations you once longed to be part of just to defend yourself. Accusations. You desperately wanted to refute people. You begged to understand you, explaining yourself again and again. But at some point you realize not every truth needs to be spoken. Not everyone is worthy of your explanation. Silence, when born from fear, is repression. But silence, when born from clarity and peace, is power. It's not weakness, it's choice. A choice to conserve your energy. A choice to walk away from unnecessary battles. A choice to let time speak the truth instead of exhausting yourself waiting for someone else's understanding. When you stop needing others to understand, you start understanding yourself. When you no longer react to every emotional trigger, you begin to master your mind. And when you choose silence over argument, you aren't avoiding the fight, you're sending a clear message. I don't need your approval to know I'm worthy. Mature silence is knowing you could speak, but choosing not to. Not because you've lost, but because you no longer need that win. You've endured enough to know that peace doesn't lie in the final word, but in no longer letting it hurt you. Silence, at this point, isn't an end. It's the beginning of a new kind of freedom, where you're no longer bound by reaction, by the need to prove, or the fear of being misunderstood. You're simply you, and that in itself is enough. Forgiving yourself. The first step to healing, perhaps what keeps you up at night, isn't what others did to you, but what you let yourself endure for too long. The times you stayed silent when you should have spoken up. The places you remained in, long after they stopped feeling like home, just to avoid hurting others. The moments you betrayed your own feelings to keep someone else comfortable. We often forgive others more easily than we forgive ourselves. We blame ourselves for being too weak, too trusting, not strong enough to walk away sooner. But you can't heal if you continue punishing yourself with guilt. You can't move toward peace if you remain stuck in past self-blame. Forgiving yourself isn't an excuse. It's a recognition. You did the best you could with the awareness, the heart, and the circumstances you had. At the time, no one taught you how to love yourself when you were still hurting. No one taught you how to leave when your heart was still holding on. And yet you made it through with honesty and grace. Healing doesn't begin with something grand. It begins with the moment you look in the mirror and no longer scold yourself. When you place your hand on your heart and whisper, I understand, and I forgive you. When you give yourself another chance not to become someone else, but to live more gently with who you are. Forgiving yourself doesn't make you weaker, it makes you lighter. And only when you stop condemning yourself can you open up to something better. No healing is complete without compassion for the very part of you that once broke. And that too is where your journey begins once more. Healing is not a destination, it's the way you live each day. There are days when you feel strong, whole, as if the past no longer has a hold on you, but then a careless word, a familiar face, a dream from nowhere, and the wound you thought had closed begins to ache again. You feel frustrated. You wonder, why can't I move on? But the truth is, healing is never a final destination. It's not a box to check or a place to arrive. Healing is an endless journey, one where you learn to live peacefully with your inner cracks, not to erase them, but to love them better. There are days when you feel powerful, confident, enough, and days when you feel lost, vulnerable, and empty. That doesn't mean you've regressed. It just means you're living honestly with what's inside you. And that too is part of healing. You don't always need to be positive. You don't always have to be okay. What you need is patience with yourself, compassion for your emotions, acceptance that sometimes the best you can do is sit still, place your hand on your chest, and whisper, "Today, I'm not okay, but I'm still here." Healing doesn't ask you to be perfect. It only invites you to return little by little to yourself, to choose each day to speak more kindly to yourself, to avoid places that once hurt you, to believe that no matter how today feels, and that alone is already a powerful step forward. Eventually, you stop trying to explain, not out of anger, not because you no longer care, but because you realize truth doesn't need permission to exist. And neither do you. You don't need to be understood to be valid. You don't need anyone's recognition to live true to yourself. When you release the need to be understood, you begin to live lighter. You start doing what brings you peace without needing approval. You step away from toxic relationships without guilt. You begin to say no without apology. And in that moment, you finally begin to live. The deepest freedom isn't in how well someone understands you. It's in whether you dare to stand by yourself, whether you dare to choose your truth, even if no one else agrees, whether you dare to live by your soul's rhythm, even when the world doesn't match your pace. And when you do, you stop chasing validation because you've become your own safe place. Living authentically doesn't require applause. It only asks for a heart brave enough to stand still in the crowd and still feel at peace. And once you have that, nothing can pull you away from yourself. Again, you've come home whole, free, untouchable. This is a journey you can't turn back from, but it's the path back to yourself. If you've made it this far, if you've listened to each part of yourself unfold, then something within you has already begun to change quietly, subtly, like a gentle awakening. You can no longer live the way you used to. You can no longer be the one who's always available to be loved, always soft to be kept, always strong just to avoid being left behind. Because now, you are the place you need to return to. No longer waiting for someone to save you. No longer reshaping yourself to fit in. No longer trading peace just to survive in places that no longer align. This journey isn't easy. And yes, there will be days when you want to go back, but you can't, because once you've tasted inner freedom, you can no longer tolerate anything fake. You don't need to be perfect. You only need to be honest with your feelings, with your boundaries, with your dreams, with your wounds. And that honesty will guide you toward the light, where you no longer have to become, but simply be peacefully and unshakably. There are no shortcuts to healing. But every small step you take, every time you choose silence over reaction, retreat over begging, yourself over losing, brings you closer to your wholeness, to a self no longer easily shaken, but deeply in touch with its own truth. And that is the highest form of freedom.